Good morning. Welcome to the Community Colleges of Baltimore Science Political Science Department Speaker Series Forum with Congressman Dutch Ruppersberger. My name is John Deedy, Coordinator and Assistant Professor of Political Science here at CCBC. Now I have the privilege and honor to introduce our college president, Dr. Sandra Kurtenitis.
Thank you, John. Well, let me just say, it is an extraordinary pleasure to welcome Congressman Ruppersberger to the Community College of Baltimore County. You know, in an age when politics seems to have become a combat sport, if not exactly a contact sport, we are really blessed to have a representative who actually understands and practices collaboration, cooperation, working across the aisles, and these are not exactly lost arts in today's electoral environment, but in truth, it's very special that we have somebody who represents us, who is as capable, as talented, and really as devoted to the interests of all of us as Congressman Ruppersberger. You may not realize this, but he's pretty much a Baltimore County guy. He served on the county council for several years. He was the chair, elected the chair twice. He then went on to becoming our county executive. So he brings to this visit today a special feeling for Baltimore County and I think for the Community College of Baltimore County, because he was part of our coming together from 3 into 1, and that was a great task of leadership. So let me just say that now that he has been representing us in the Congress for the past 15 years?
Going into my
13th, okay. Well, I'll make you a little more experienced, but that's okay. 13 years he has been representing us. He has served on very powerful committees, appropriations, and really, I think the most recent accomplishment has been his representing us on, and I don't know the exact name, but he has been one of the guardians of cybersecurity in terms Intelligence Committee, of course. That's a great place to be. But he has been the ranking member on that committee for a long time. Let me tell you, you are in for a great treat because Congressman Ruppersberger is with us today. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Well, Sandra, thank you for the introduction, and John, thank you also for organizing this. Now, we have a class here today of what? Poli-sci, some cyber, and what else?
Intro to political science.
Okay.
Nice variety.
Political science, is that what you take if you want to be a politician? You never know what happens in life, I tell you that. In fact, I'm going to start out by a story how I got in politics, only because I know a lot of you here are you're being educated, and that's the best thing you can do in your life right now. That's what makes our country so good, is if you really look at our history, is education. And I was an investigative prosecutor. I was coming home from work. I was in a really bad automobile accident, thrown out of the vehicle, and I ended up in Maryland shock trauma. I had about 15 fractures, 47 pints of blood. I like to say they didn't expect me to live. The Lord wouldn't have me. The devil wouldn't take me. I had a lot of serious injuries, lungs. I had severe head injuries, and they told my wife, they said that they could help me out, but they didn't think they could deal with the brain swelling. Well, as it turns out, I have asthma, and I was on prednisone before the accident, so my brain didn't swell like a normal brain. So that asthma ended up saving my life. So you never know what happens in life. But that's not the real story. Why I bring this up is that I went to the person who started Maryland shock trauma. His name was R.A. Calley, and he was a MASH doctor in the Korean War. And he studied trauma when people were killed and shot and that type of thing. Not killed, shot and wounded. And I went to him and I said, you created a system that saved my life. What can I do to help? And he said, run for office. We need all the help we can get. And to this day, I'm vice chair of the board of Maryland Shock Trauma. I work very closely to get the money for research. They're the #1 institute, rated #1 trauma center in the world. But they also work with the troops and a lot of the people that have been hurt and maimed in Iraq and Afghanistan. And again, I want to bring that up, #1, because shock trauma is in the state of Maryland. You have a better chance in Maryland if you have a trauma, automobile accident, fall, whatever that may be, if you can get in the system than anywhere else in the world. But secondly, they are the focal point, and they do all the consulting and help our wounded warriors in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, I've been asked to talk today about two areas. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking, but I want to open it up for questions. And I think I can hear more from you, and anything can be on the table. I'm going to talk a little bit about education, higher education, and then I'm going to talk about cybersecurity and how dangerous this world is. And when we open up for questions, I mean, I'll even talk about the Orioles. I have my Orioles tie on here today, if anybody sees, even though it didn't do too well yesterday, but that's okay. It's a long season. First thing as far as education, as I said before, education clearly is one of the most important things anyone can do in life. It puts you in another level. It helps not only you, your family, your community, it helps our country, the more that we can have education. But there's a problem in education right now, and that's costs. And we have to deal with this issue of costs. We're trying right now in Congress to work through some of the Pell Grant issues, making sure that we can have more money for students to pay for education. We're trying, and we just passed last year, which was good, we just passed a cap on how much you have to pay back your loans every year, so you can pay for your rent and other issues like that. But unfortunately, over in Congress now, a lot of people don't get along, and that's not right. When our forefathers created our system of government, we created a system of checks and balances, the judiciary, the administration, and Congress. But right now, we have a situation where compromise is considered to be a bad word. Excuse me. And that's not the way our nation was created, and we're trying to work through that. Now, there's a law out there, and I want to make sure, does anyone here know what sequestration is? All right, sequestration, you hear about it, and it's out there, but what sequestration is basically is a law that was passed by Congress, and it shouldn't have been passed, and it means that everything is cut across the board. When you're dealing in budgeting, in other words, when your county executive, when your mayor, when your president puts together a budget, you have to pick priorities. What are you going to put money into? Are you going to put money into education? Are you going to put money into pre-child education? Are you going to put money into infrastructure, military, police, whatever you're going to do? But the issue of budgeting is priorities. What they did in Congress, and no one thought it would pass because it was such a lousy law, everything's cut across the board. And when you have things cut across the board, everybody gets cut. And that's what's happening in our country right now. And it's very serious, and we have to get the Democrats and Republicans to come together and to change that law. It was a law that never should have passed. And if we don't, our country's going to be weaker. One of the committees I sit on is the Defense Appropriations Committee. That's the largest budget we have in Congress. And just in the last 2 weeks, we've had the head of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines all come before our committee and have said, if we don't repeal this law of sequestration, that we're going to be weaker as a country, that we probably are one of the most dangerous cycles right now that we've been in this world, other than our World War probably I and II. When you deal with the issue of cyber attacks, when you deal with the issue of China, Russia, when you're dealing with communism, terrorism, all of those different issues. And we need to be strong. And if you look at world history, anybody here take a world history class? Well, if you did, you'll see in world history that you need to be strong in order to be safe and free. You know, continually over and over, if you look at history, that those countries that are small and that are not strong and stand up are taken over a lot, whether it was the Roman Empire or whatever that may be. So this is really something important. Sequestration, you'll hear about it. We want to try to change it, but it's making everything weaker, including what you do here. That means less money comes to your from your federal government, to your state government, to your local government, to your colleges, to your elementary, high, and schools. That means our infrastructure, our roads aren't being repaired and fixed. It's not a good thing. So we've got to turn that around. So the next thing I've been asked to speak to, too, is cybersecurity. Now, let me tell you what my job has been for the last 12 years, and I've been the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. In Washington, you have different committees. One committee I'm on was Appropriations, and that's the committee that's in charge of all the money. They decide where the money goes. And we have a committee hearing, we hear testimony, then it goes before our whole Appropriations Committee, then it goes to Congress, to the House, 435 members, and we vote on what we spend and that type of thing. Now, the Intelligence Committee that I'm on is a committee that oversees all of the intelligence agencies, and that includes CIA, NSA, which is right down the street, FBI, NGO, which is the when you take pictures all over the United States, and whether you're taking pictures from a weather point of view and a scientific point of view, or you're taking pictures to see what the bad guys are doing, moving their equipment, moving bombs, seeing whether Russia's trying to sneak in some missiles or weapons, all those type of things. Intelligence, by the way, is the best defense against terrorism. And there are two types of intelligence. There's what they call signal or SIGINT intelligence, and that's the intelligence that we use to get information from our enemies or people throughout the world. Signals intelligence is what NSA does. NSA is in Fort Meade, and I can't say exactly the number, it's classified, but it's the largest employer in the state of Maryland, the NSA. And they probably do more to protect us than any other entity that we have. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the information that NSA gets from our enemies, 80% of what our military gets is from the NSA. When we're trying to protect ourselves from terrorism, it's from the NSA. And these issues out there, and I'll address any question about how NSA is listening to you, that's not the case. You know, we are the strictest country in the world when it comes to our checks and balances. I was a former investigative prosecutor. If we want to go after bad guys, organized crime, or drug dealers, and we want to either go knock their door down to find them with drugs, or we want to listen to them to get information to protect them, we have to go to a court. And that's what our country's about, checks and balances. We have more checks and balances in this country, and we protect our constitutional rights, our Fourth Amendment rights. And what NSA does, if they try, someone at NSA tries to listen to someone illegally, just one person, they can be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Now, if you're not in this business and you listen to the media or other people, I would probably think NSA is listening to me, and that's not the case. NSA could care less whether you're talking to a girlfriend, a boyfriend, ordering a pizza, whatever you're doing. Their job is to focus on national security and to support our military to protect our country and to protect our country from a lot of bad things. And this, as I said before, it's a very serious time that we're in right now. People ask me, I was on what they call the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight is the President of the Senate, the ranking member. Ranking member means, by the way, the minority. You have the majority and minority. You say the President of the Senate, the ranking member of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the ranking member, and then the committee that I'm on, the Intelligence Committee, and the Senate Committee. And the Gang of Eight, we get the most sensitive information. When you're on these intelligence committees, you get briefed 4 or 5 times a week. But I got the most sensitive information that is so secretive that it could really hurt our country or people could get killed. And we get briefed. And the reason we get briefed from the CIA, the NSA, whatever, that's the check and balance, because they work for the administration and we oversee them. And so anyhow, I'm a member of the Gang of Eight and had been for the last 4 years. People will say, well, Dutch, what keeps you up at night? You hear all this stuff. It's really serious. And I'll say, first, spicy Mexican food. Secondly, weapons of mass destruction, which could be bombs, that type of thing that we're concerned about, like what's going on now in Iran. We don't want them to have nuclear weapons. The third is the terrorism issue. Very, very serious. And I just came back about 3 weeks ago from Tunisia, where they just had an attack there. And then the fourth is cyber. And cyber is one of the most serious threats we have to our country and to our world. Now, let's get into the cyber area. Cyber is the internet was a very positive thing that happened to our country and to our world. But as a lot of things happen, there are a lot of bad people out there that are using it for nefarious reasons. And we have to be very much concerned because we have great vulnerabilities, all of us, in our country. If you have an iPhone, if you have whatever you have, a computer, you can be hacked. Now, there are different types of hacking, and I want to get into those 2 areas on the hacking. And by the way, the state of Maryland is considered to be the national security capital of the world, basically because we have NSA, but also because of all the jobs that surround NSA, who work with NSA, and to deal with that area. And it's a great advantage for you all who live in the state of Maryland who want to get into this field. Because right now, we have 6,000, we have requests for 6,000 jobs in the area of cybersecurity, whatever that might be. And we've only been able to fill 4,000 right now. So cyber is a great, if you want to be in that field, called STEM education, math, science, engineering, that is a great field for people in our jurisdiction because we're considered the #1 place in the world as far as that's concerned. All right, now what are the seriousness about cyber? There are two types of cyber attacks, basically. The one is what they call a destructive attack, and the other one is stealing information. And it's been estimated that in the last 8 years, the United States of America has had close to $1 trillion stolen from us because of cyber attacks. It's probably the largest transfer of wealth in the history of our country. The majority of the people that are stealing is China. China is extremely aggressive in stealing our information. But there are other countries out there that are doing it on a regular basis, Russia, other countries, but they're also bad guys. And they're also businesses that are trying to get information. Now, how do you transfer this money? Well, they're not just taking money, they're taking trade secrets. And probably every major corporation in this country has somehow or some way been cyber attacked. Whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in the space field, whether it's in the financial field. China has literally cyber attacked our fertilizer companies because they're in the fertilizer business. I mean, that's how serious this is. And I have been to China on numerous occasions within the last year, just the last year, and trying to get China we say, China, you got to stop stealing from us. Well, of course, they will say, we're not stealing, and they're denying it, and they think we're doing it, which we're not. And one thing we don't do, every country probably in the world is in the intelligence business, getting information and intelligence to protect their country. But the United States of America and our allies, we do not steal information from other countries, companies in that arena. We don't go and cyber attack Chinese companies like they do to us. And that's very, very serious, and we have got to find a way to get countries like China to grow up and be big boys and say, hey, we need a global type of system where there's an accountability if you're going to steal from us. And that is very serious. But even more serious than the stealing side, and that's the stealing side. The other side is what we call destructive attacks, and that was Sony. And that's the first time that it was North Korea. We clearly had determined it was North Korea. North Korea, a destructive attack is when they literally shut you down. They can steal all your information and get anything you want. They can take that information, they can use it against you, they can blackmail you, they can do whatever they want. But it's a destructive attack to shut you down. And that's what they did with Sony. They literally shut it down. One of the most serious destructive attacks that happened about maybe 2-3 years ago was a company called Aramco. Aramco is probably the largest oil company in the world. They're the oil company for Saudi Arabia. Aramco had 30,000 of their computers destructive attack, cyber attack, and they were shut down for days. It affected oil prices. And I have to say it this way, but Iran did it. But the media has reported that Iran shut down the Aramco. Iran and Saudi Arabia constantly are battling each other, and Iran, you have to watch Iran. They're a bad country. They export terrorism, and that was another issue. But there was another example of destructive attack. And what bothers me and what concerns me, because I kind of specialize in the area of cyber, is that we are so vulnerable in the United States to a destructive attack any day of the week. And you could take a hacker in the United States who's really smart, and there are a lot of real smart hackers out there, and they're in India, and they're in Russia, they're in other parts of the world, and do the same thing that was done to Sony. What bothers me a lot is our grid electrical system. It's very easy for a destructive attack on our grid system. When I was your Baltimore County executive, and we used to have severe snowstorms, and the power would go out for a day or two, people would go nuts. Well, just think if they were to take out a power grid system, elevators stop, everything else, air traffic control. And that could happen. And that's part of what NSA is doing in research and development, trying to detect these attacks and then find a way to protect us from these attacks. It's very easy to be on the offensive when you're doing these attacks, but the defensive is tough because you've got to see, and we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of attacks. There's a tremendous amount of volume in this field. So remember about cyber. You might not go in that field, but it's a very serious issue. I have legislation that has been introduced the last couple of years to allow our intelligence community, basically the NSA, who sees most of these attacks coming in. They have the technology. But by a 1947 law, the NSA is not allowed to take the information and give it to the private sector. An example is Target, or like Target. You know, you had a situation where Target was attacked. Cost them probably $1 billion. Their CEO was fired. That could happen any day of the week. And then it was Home Depot, and it can keep happening any day of the week. And we have the capability to work with the private sector, but we have to pass the law. And I've had that law in. We passed the House of Representatives. In order to pass a law, the House has to pass the law, the Senate, you have to agree, and then the President has to sign it. And so far, this law that we have in to allow information sharing has not passed the Senate yet. And it's a shame it hasn't. We're trying hard. We're going to vote on it again next week, and hopefully these laws will pass to protect all of us. Because if you go out on the street, the majority of people don't have a clue about what cybersecurity is, or really what the threats are. Anybody see 60 Minutes last night? Did you see about the cyber attack last night? How dangerous it is, and yet most people don't know about it. And you know, I think the privacy groups that are out there are good because they're raising issues that need to be raised on our constitutional rights. No one wants anyone to listen to them. But because but they're talking about what could happen. And if we pass the correct laws, just like we do search and seizure warrants when we're going after a murderer or we're going after organized crime or drug dealers and that type of thing, that's the same thing we do in our field as it relates to cyber. So we've got to get not only our country where it needs to be, pass the laws to protect us, we've also got to get the world to come together because this is really getting to be serious. When the United States can show that we're losing $2 billion a year because we're being cyber attacked, our companies are being cyber attacked, our space programs, I mean, just millions and millions of dollars of trade secrets that we're losing, all the research and development. It's pretty serious. The only other thing I'll get into just a little bit about terrorism. Terrorism is very serious. You all have heard of ISIS or ISIS, whatever. I mean, they're very serious. It's really a really bizarre group. I mean, they're vicious, and the more that they cut heads off and they burn people alive, that's part of what they want to do because they're trying to radicalize. They're trying to recruit people anywhere in the world, including the United States of America. And if for whatever reason, this radicalization is part of what they do to recruit. I'll give you an example. We had an American who became radicalized. However, you know, sometimes they read a magazine that comes out called Inspire. Sometimes they could go to a certain area and they learn other people and are recruited. But we had this individual who was from Florida. He went over to Syria to be radicalized. He joined up. And he was trained to be a suicide bomber. Why would you want to give your life for that? Went over, was trained, came home to visit his parents, and unfortunately, the problem we have in the United States, if you're some of our allies or you're an American, all you need is a passport to come in and out. So it's very difficult for us to see everyone coming in. If you have a visa, like if you come from a country where you have to sign up and get a visa, it's easier. So anyhow, this individual, he was trained, suicide bomber, went to Florida, came back, killed himself and other people. Now, he could have done the same damage here in the United States. And our concern, we don't no longer have a concern like another 9/11 concern because we're so sophisticated now with our intelligence and our ability, whether it's NSA, whether it's CIA, which is called human intelligence, and that's where you get information from people, or with all of our different technology that we have. But what we're really concerned about more than anything else in the terrorism realm is we call it the lone wolf, and it's not one person, but it's under the radar type of attacks. And we know Al-Qaeda, even though you've heard about ISIS. Al-Qaeda is very sophisticated, and they have some very smart people who are plotting to attack the United States and our allies. The Paris attack was an attack the kind I'm concerned about, because it was under the radar. These people in Al-Qaeda are smart. We have an individual in Yemen. Yemen is a very dangerous place, and I've been there on numerous occasions. It's called the Al-Qaeda of the Arabian Peninsula. Their focus is the United States to attack us. Remember the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, that was all coming out of that area. And there was an individual who was an American, who was a mullah, and we eventually brought him to justice. That means we were able to take him out. But his goal was to target us on a continual basis. They're individuals. There's an individual in Yemen right now, and we have not been able to find him, they call him the bomb maker. And he is without a doubt one of the most intelligent individuals in the world when it comes to making sophisticated bombs. He's developing plastic bombs to put in people's bodies so they can go through airports and then get on an airplane and pew. I mean, that's what they're dealing with. That's their whole focus in life. And the sad thing about it is that they're saying they're doing this for God. And I have a lot of Muslim friends and a lot of Muslims that I know, and that enrages them that this group, a small percentage of that religion, would say they're doing this for God and for religious reasons. And I think what I've said to a lot of my Muslim friends, including those in this area, but that I've met internationally and nationally, is the Muslim community needs to stand up, and especially when it comes to their children or their teenagers or their college students, that this is not what God wants them to do, and they have to send that message. And I think one of the best things I've seen so far, the president of Egypt, he came out maybe about a month ago, and he said, enough's enough. Our religious leaders, if we find that you're teaching radical Islam, that you're teaching religiously, our children and our people, our youth, that it's okay to kill in the name of God, it's wrong, and we're going to go after you. And I think it's being effective. We need to continue to do that, because unfortunately what's happening is that this is hurting the entire Muslim community throughout the world because of the percentage of a few, and that's got to stop. There are many great Muslim Americans who work with us, and there are Americans who contribute every day. But that's what the world is now, and that's why you need intelligence. All right, let me stop now, because I could go on about this for a long time. I've been to about 55 different countries, or 53 different countries, not Bermuda, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, all these hotspots. And the reason is that when I oversee the intelligence community in the military, or whether it's CIA, NSA, we need to go to the front line. We do their budgets and we oversee them. And oversight, too, has to do with the issue of making sure they follow the law. And again, I do want to mention Snowden, because Snowden, he went to the media. He said that he went to leadership of NSA to complain, never did. I mean, and then when he got this information, and it took a while to get it, when he got this information, the first place that he went to Hong Kong, and he met with the Russians and then the Chinese. And then you know what has happened in Ukraine. And Russia, a lot of what he stole was military information that the Russians now have, which really makes us weaker when we're dealing with Russia. We have the checks and balances. The laws are clearly there. I've been on national TV, Face the Nation, to discuss this, because it was like a feeding frenzy when the Snowden thing came out. Oh my goodness, NSA is listening to everybody. NSA is breaking the law. Never one incident, not one incident that occurred. And there are billions of different conversations throughout the years that come through NSA and other intelligence agencies. All right, any questions? Not one? Okay, I'll see you. No, there'll be one. I'll ask myself a question. Who here, I ask you all, who here is interested in going into cyber? Anybody? Well, let me tell you some of the things that happen in cyber. You have a program. What's the program called? What's your program? Cybersecurity Institute on your campus. Tremendous amount of jobs, and if you care about this area, you might want to look at it. You probably need an aptitude to an extent, but you don't need to have also a 4-year degree to go into the area of cyber. There's thousands and thousands of jobs that are available. And so with respect to what you're doing in this campus is tremendous. One of the things about community colleges is there are different reasons that people go to community colleges, but they're extremely valuable. Whether you're younger and out of high school and you're not sure what you want to do, whether your grades weren't really where you needed to be to get into the college of your choice, but whatever reason that is, and then there is the retraining and retooling. Probably more people at ninth school than I see here today. It's a new generation, folks. As you see, the Masters golfer yesterday, 21 years old, that broke all the records. So, our time is starting to wane a little bit. But by the way, if you're 60, 60 is the new 40, so you'll be okay. All right. Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm talking to anybody. Oh, you think I'm talking to you? No. I would never acknowledge a woman's age. My father would be very upset. He'd roll around in his grave if he knew I was doing that. But no. But anyhow, in the cyber realm, if you do have an app, you might want to look into it on this campus, because it's something that we need. We are the cybersecurity capital of the world. You've heard about Silicon Valley and technology in California. Well, that's what we are here, and it's really because NSA is here and the things we're doing. Yes?
You said that when you spoke that you made a mention of Egypt cracking down on religious leaders teaching youth radicalism. Do you then support that concept here with certain groups trying to implement Sharia law or anything to an extreme degree? How do you feel the rebuttal that the state should take?
Well, that's a good question, and it can go a lot of different ways. You hear the question about in Egypt how the president there has come down on the religious leaders, saying you got to stop teaching, this radical Islam where you're teaching our kids that they need to die for God. What and how would that? How does government involve with that? Number one is that in the United States of America, we feel very strongly about our Constitution and what our forefathers created. And if you look at our history, and we haven't been here a long time compared to most of these other countries in the world, you'll see that we have a really good system. It's a system of checks and balances that work. Things get a little haywire, like going on in Congress now, all this partisan politics back and forth, but that will balance out. You always see somehow in history things balance out. But one of the things we feel very strongly about are First Amendment rights and the ability for people to speak without the government coming down on them. Some of the things you can't do, like if you're in a movie theater and it's packed and you say fire, that's something that is not covered by First Amendment. So you have to let a lot of things happen in this country to have the freedoms and liberty that we have. Give you an example. There's a magazine called Inspire, and it's put out by the leader, it's put out by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. The individual, Laki, who we brought to justice, put it out, and he uses it as a recruiting tool all over the world, but especially the United States. And what that did, that magazine, it recruited people, why you should join Al-Qaeda, what you need to do, but also put in there how to make bombs. And if you look at what happened in Boston with the two brothers, that's the type of bomb that they taught them how to make or gave instructions in that magazine. That magazine comes out every month here in the United States. There's nothing we can do to stop it. Those are the freedoms that we deal with. But what we have here in this country, and we have more checks and balances here than in Britain and France and other areas, is the judiciary. So, like, if any American, and you might not realize this, even though because of all the false information out there, but nobody in the United States can be listened to, an American, unless you have a court order, which is the same way if you were a drug dealer and the cops are coming after you. You have to go to a judge. You have to have probable cause, and what they call an affidavit, and the judge has to approve it for you to go and to either listen to their phone or whatever. So you don't realize that, but we have tremendous protections of freedom and liberty in this country. And then you balance it out. But if you have the courts involved, and you have the judiciary, and then you have us in Congress. Remember, I oversee NSA, CIA, my committee. The Congress does. We also have the courts if we want to do certain things, especially as it relates to NSA. So when it comes to what happened in Egypt, we probably wouldn't order people because that's First Amendment right. Remember, most of these other countries don't have the freedom and liberties that we have. I've done a lot of traveling, and when I come home to the United States of America, I'm going to kiss the ground in the United States because we have the best country in the world. We have more freedom and liberties here than anywhere in the world. And yet we take it, we complain about it, and I think a lot of it is because national media is always throwing out the negative. You turn on news tonight, what will you hear? This person was murdered. I'm saying it. I am concerned how media handles certain situations, like they did with Snowden. Snowden is a person that turned his back on the United States. He stole information, and instead of coming to NSA if he had a problem, he takes it to the media, and the media then takes it to, then he gives it to Russia and China. That's not patriotic.
So it would be in conclusion that we need to take it per incident, not to infringe on certain people's rights?
You take every incident by itself. Yes, you have individual freedoms and liberties. You have First Amendment rights of free speech, but you have Fourth Amendment rights, and that's search and seizure. You have a right not to have your home searched unless there's a court order. Now, there's certain examples sometimes, exigent circumstances, somebody just robbed a bank and you're chasing them, that type of thing. Yes?
You mentioned Snowden and how he was bad for the United States. So what was your take on the whole release of 6 prisoners from Guantanamo Bay for a bird dog?
That's a good question. Did you hear the question? He said, you mentioned Snowden and how I have a concern. What about bird dog? I had a problem with that. In my party, I was one of the few that did. The reason I had a party with the bird dog thing is because we exchanged terrorists for someone else. Once you do that, you set a precedent. We never do that. You make every single military person who is captured, vulnerable. You put Americans throughout the world, subjected to kidnapping, because once the terrorists know that you will trade, it's going to keep going. That was my concern there, and whether or not he was, and as it turned out, I think he's being prosecuted right now for leaving. But that wasn't the issue. It was the issue of trading, setting a precedent. You can't let the bad guys know that you're going to be weak when it comes to that, or then they're going to be taking more people. I remember Colin Powell. Remember Colin Powell? People know who he was, a very respected general. He was Secretary of State. And that was his position, that we have to protect our people in the military. And if they are subjected to being kidnapped or held as prisoners for that reason and to be bargained, then it's never going to stop. That was a good question. Yeah.
Do you think nation building has contributed to the rise of terror?
Do I think what?
Nation building, has it contributed to the rise of terror?
Well, what do you mean, like what nation building?
The United States or other countries going into these impoverished areas and these weak states.
That's a good point about our country going into other areas of poverty. No, I don't think so at all. I think if you look at who we are as the United States, I happen to also sit on an appropriations committee that appropriates money to a lot of these different countries throughout the world. There are a lot of people out there in this country, this world, have a very difficult time. There are a lot of children out there that are starving, have diseases, that malnutrition. And we are the best country in the world. And we try to help these countries as long as the money goes to help the people. And sometimes we had a problem that a lot of the money would be taken by the leaders of these countries. But where I have a concern, though, is that we have to watch how we export democracy. And Egypt is a perfect example. A lot of these countries have been around for a long time. There's a lot of issues in the Muslim world between Sunni and Shia that really have nothing to do with us, and they're constantly battling each other all the time. In Iraq, over and over again. Now, Egypt was a strong ally of ours. They were one of the few countries that was involved with Israel in the peace process. But they had a quasi-dictator, and eventually they got rid of him, the Arab Spring. Now, democracy is democracy. You register to vote, and whoever wins, gets the most votes wins. Well, what happened in Egypt is that the only group that was organized was the Muslim Brotherhood. The people who were involved in Arab Spring didn't even vote. All the groups of people did not come out and vote. So here you had a situation where we are saying we have to stand behind democracy 100%, and yet the Muslim Brotherhood took over the country and started to do the same things that the person they knocked out did. Putting people who disagree with them in jail, taking the radical type of approach. I was over in Egypt 2 weeks before Morsi, who was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, and he was elected the president. And we talked to him about how your country's falling apart. Your infrastructure's falling apart. You're the largest Arab country in the world. and yet you're not managing it correctly. You're taking your wealthy business people and you're shaking them down, and they're all leaving the country. You've got serious problems. And all he wanted to talk about, that I have connections with Hamas and I can solve the Israeli-Palestinian issue. That's all he wanted to talk about. 2 weeks later, he was out. Now, the military in Egypt was respected. For whatever reason, throughout the years, they were respected. And the military just watched what was going on. They didn't do a lot, and they kept watching it. And then they saw their country just falling apart. So eventually, they came up with a coup. Now, from the United States' point of view, that's not democracy. And yet, if you look at Egypt, and for the people in Egypt that were being governed by a group that was probably even worse than what they had before, poverty was at its worst level. They were taking people without rights and putting them in jail if you disagreed with them. And the military took control. And as it turned out, once they got control, they then had an election. And as it turned out, the head general became the president. Now, whether or not that was a totally legal election, I'm not sure. But they took control, and now Egypt is back on its way to dealing with their citizens, starting to create jobs, starting to do things. The United States wasn't there for a while. That almost caused a serious problem. So we have to watch, and I think you talked about it, you have to take each individual case as it comes. We can't take our democracy in the United States. We're the best country in the world. And we'd love to have every single country run their country the way we do, except maybe get Congress to cool down a little bit. But basically, that we have to take it as they come. And remember, we're the new kids on the block. You look at thousands of years. The United States is not that old, and yet we're that good. We're the strongest country in the world. We have more freedoms and democracy. And yet, because of national media, in some situations, most people say, oh, our country's falling apart. We're not doing what we need to do. And that's not the case. I mean, we're coming out of a recession. Look how we did it. Look at some of these countries out there. When we had the Gore-Bush presidency, and we had to count, the votes right down to the end. There were a lot of allegations. In some countries, there would have been a coup there. And total constitutional, it went right through the process, and, Bush ended up winning. Okay, anybody? Yeah. Cat, either one.
All right, well,
you're honest.
Did the founding fathers and their precedents and what they said in the Constitution and whatnot, now, on that basis, how come we don't go along with George Washington's precedent of isolationism, which helped us in the original upstart of the country?
Well, why don't you define isolationism to me?
Where we isolate ourselves from the outside country, other than...
That's libertarian.
All their...
Because if you look at our country, that was, when our country was founded, there were concepts. It was a constitution. And then we have to govern, and we have people, and we have things that occur. We have technology that's come through. We've had different types of jobs. We've had wars. And as you evolve through the process, but we've constantly kept, whether the forefathers created the Constitution, but the Constitution as interpreted by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court interpreted. Yeah, go ahead.
So would you say that we only take bits and pieces from the original?
No, I'd say that we deal with issues as they come before us. We have the rule of law. We have our Constitution that we follow. And yet we have to hold government accountable for what they do. Yeah, go ahead.
From that, you were talking about the checks and balances between the governmental agencies.
Yep.
How do, and you mentioned the Snowden thing and how that was wrong. How do the American people check and balance their government besides just electing officials and trusting them to do it?
Because that's the best way to do it, and it's to elect officials, and you're held accountable every election. And what I do, and I tell you, there's a lot of money that's wasted on advertising, but we run every 2 years, and our forefathers created a system of government where Congress has to run every 2 years. I think now with media it should be 4, but by running every 2 years, I'm held accountable every 2 years for what we do. And there are changes. Just look at what happened in the state of Maryland, which is a Democratic state, and elected a Republican governor. I mean, you've got to look at the system itself. There's certain rules of law that you abide by. You're not supposed to speed. You're not supposed to break certain laws. You're going to be held accountable. But even if you are arrested by government, where in most countries you're arrested, you're put in jail. In the United States of America, you have to go before the courts, and you have to be held, you have to be found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. Not many countries that do that in this country. But as things evolve in technology, if you just sit there and do nothing, isolated, you'll be taken over. You know, we are not the smartest country in the world. We have some very smart people. And yet we have some of the smartest people come to our colleges and institutions and work with us in mathematics and physics and space and all these things. If you're isolated, you're going to die, in my opinion. You have to. We're a global economy with transportation, with media, with internet, and also you have to stay ahead of the curve. Russia and China are trying to do whatever they can to be superior to us and our technologies that we use to protect us, whether they're missiles, satellites, cyber, weaponry, anything like that. Yeah.
You speak extensively on cyber and the importance of it, and I watched an hour-and-a-half video where Snowden interviewed Harvard electronically. And some of the things that he knows are really, really intense and in-depth, meaning that I would trust his, what he says to be true. So the information that he knows, that he holds is probably very, very valuable, and I don't know the extent of that, I guess only he does. With Snowden knowing the volume that he does, and when he left and he visited Russia, and then Russia dabbling in Ukraine with that situation, would you say that if he shared anything with Russia, that attributed to the dealings with Ukraine, and then moving forward, if he has that much volume of secrets, what are we to do to deal with protecting the secrets that he has?
Well, that's a good question. What's he talking about with Snowden? He said he's very smart and got a lot of information. Well, let me address that first. Number two is the information that he got, that he received, and he gave to Russia and China, that hurt in Ukraine. Yes, it did, because they were getting information. Now, first thing, Snowden wasn't that smart, but he was smart enough to get a job, and he knew technology. Snowden did not penetrate, thank goodness, some of our most serious, but he got a lot of it. How he got it, though, because he was a technician, and he was able to plug in and get the information. And as a result of that, we didn't have the checks and balances that we have now because of that. So what he did, and he had outside help too. So what he did when he got in, he was able to get in there and retrieve this data where other people around him, like the Guardian newspaper as an example, were able to coordinate with him and get all this information. Give an example how that can occur. You've heard of it was the Target attack. Now, you know, how do you think that they were penetrated and stole? They cost them millions and millions of dollars. It was a disaster for them. All it was an air conditioning repairman who had the technology to plug his system into an air conditioning unit to fix it and to check it out. And that's how the bad guys got in. And once they got in, they went through the whole Target system. That's technology. That's what cybersecurity is about. So it wasn't as if he was that smart. He wasn't stupid, or he wouldn't be working at NSA, but he was a technician. And there's real brainiacs that are some of the smartest people in the world that work at NSA that are dealing with all these formulas and algorithms and things like that. You know, that wasn't where he was, but because the technology is so broad, once he got in, he was able to get that information.
With Russia doing that, if we don't hold Russia accountable, or the national state doesn't, then what does to stop Russia or other countries from now just?
First thing, Putin's a very dangerous person. He's a rattlesnake, and he'll bite you. So you have to show Putin that you mean business. But you know, we don't want to go to war either. But you have to stand up. How we've stood up to him, which is working, is sanctions. The weakness that Russia has is that Russia doesn't have a lot of money, where China does. So right now, our sanctions have hurt Russia big time, especially with Ukraine, when we stood up to him, when we got our European allies to say, we're not going to buy any more of your natural gas. And what he did, he finally cut a deal with China, and he's selling it for a lot less. So, you know, how you deal in the world, I mean, you have to take each case as it comes. But you have to show that when you're going to stand up, you're going to stand up also. But you want to avoid war at all costs. We don't want another Iraq or Afghanistan, but we don't want world war either. And a person like Putin, who walks around with his shirt off and an egomaniac, I mean, you know, but he's a dangerous person. And so we're doing it through sanctions more than anything else at this point. But and by getting our allies to go with us, which a lot of them didn't at first, really helped because it's hurting them now. You know, Putin's a billionaire, and he's only worked for government all his life. What does that say? He's stolen a lot of money from his country. Yeah, who had their hand up? Yes. You give me the hook? I'll tell you what, there's a couple questions out there. Let me do them real quick because everybody else has been asking the same. Yep.
You say that we're trying to avoid a world war, but if we keep sending more troops over there, isn't it eventually going to turn?
It depends. It depends on what you need to do. Should we have gone to Iraq is more, in my opinion, that's the question. You know, we've never gone into a country in the history of the United States where they haven't attacked us first, and Iraq did not attack us first. In my opinion, we made a mistake not finishing what we started in Afghanistan because we had the world behind us, and those are the people that attacked us in 9/11, and we knew where they were. And we didn't finish what we started, and then we got into a situation, got totally out of hand. A lot of mistakes were made. You know, we literally got rid of the entire military in Iraq, and that was they were Sunnis. And that became the insurgency that al-Qaeda hired. That's what caused the battle for all that period of time. And so, but you know, it depends on the situation. I mean, do we allow carnage? Do we allow things that ISIS is doing now? And if you don't stop them, they're eventually going to come here too. But the thing I have a problem with is that we can't be the sheriff for the whole world anymore. You know, we're the strongest country in the world, but countries over there have to coordinate. We have other issues we need to do. We've got a lot of issues in the Asia area. Go ahead.
This way that ISIS is rebelling against us for going into Iraq in the first place, that it's not about us stopping them, it's about them rebelling against us?
Well, whether it is or it isn't, what they're doing is not right, and they're dangerous to you and me and our family and our allies. And you've got to stop them. You see what they've done. And they really feel that they're being led by God, and they're trying to control territory now, too. Look, there's the philosophical argument, and you're right on. You can say that a lot of the reason for this to begin with is that they think that we've come into their country when we really went into Iraq. And that is the motivation. But the people that are out there now, or the people that are killing little girls because they're going to school or shooting girls, I mean, that's not what the world's about. So we as a world have to come together. The problem is that we're the strongest and that we keep going to these areas. You haven't seen that as much, but when you have to respond, you have to respond, and that's what intelligence is about. Nobody wants war. I mean, look, there's even negotiations going on with the Taliban right now, with the new Afghan government.
I'm just looking at it from a historical point of view. Like, I agree, ISIS, you know, they need to be stopped. I agree that what happened during Vietnam, that needed to not happen. But we went into Vietnam and we lost Vietnam.
Right, exactly.
Many people in Vietnam. We're doing the same thing now. History keeps repeating itself, and I don't know. I don't understand.
Well, no, I think there's one difference. I think you're raising a really good point, but there's a difference. Is that we were attacked. In Vietnam, that wasn't an attack situation. We were attacked with 9/11. That's when it started. Okay, and as a result, we responded. My issue, and history will judge what happened in Iraq. And I think if you look at history 10, 12 years from now, we probably made a mistake. And when we went in there, we made a mistake on how we handled it. Again, by getting rid of their military. You know how we started to end the war in Iraq? And I was over there at the time. What we did is that we were about 120,000 military people who were fighting Iran, by the way. They had their own military. And they were Sunnis, mostly Sunnis. And when we came in, we totally disbanded their military. Well, these are people that had jobs. That was their job. They needed money for families. And what they did is that they then went, Al-Qaeda at that time had money. They had a lot of money, a lot of very wealthy people who were funding Al-Qaeda. And they paid them to be the military. So these are trained military people. And that's what the insurgency was about, you know, in all the fighting that occurred in Iraq. Well, what happened after a while, when you had this guy from Jordan, and he was a part of Al-Qaeda, and he's the one that started cutting heads off. There was a reporter by the name of Rose. He cut his head off. And a lot of Al-Qaeda said, He said, you're so bad and blatant, we don't want to cut people's heads off, and we don't want to cut Muslims' heads off. And as a result of that, that's where the ISIS group left Al-Qaeda, because they were just so radical. But, you know, in the end, how we were able to stop that war is that we ended up making a decision. We paid over $100,000. We paid over $100,000 called the Sons of Iraq, who was the old military of Saddam Hussein, and we paid them to come back, and they stabilized Iraq. I literally walked down the street in Iraq, a place I would have been blown away, with the Sons of Iraq, who didn't have uniforms on, and they were the Sunni. By the way, I walked down there. You know Gabby Giffords, the congresswoman who got shot in the head? She was with me. A month later, she comes to her own country, and she's shot. And so, you know, what you're saying is going to be studied with history, and you're raising some really good points. And I think that's their justification. But it's gotten to another level now, when these people are all they're doing is killing kids. I mean, they'll go into a village, they'll take the kids here, and then their fathers. They'll have the women here, and then they'll go shoot all the fathers in front of the kids, and then they'll go take the women, they'll take them, they'll rape them, or they'll say, you're going to be married to this person and that person. That's what they're doing. These terrorists are bad news, and they've got to be stopped. And it's not just us who have to stop them. It's got to be the other countries who have to stand up. And I'm really worried about Africa, by the way. I saw 2 people here from Kenya and Nigeria. Africa is getting very serious. That's another haven, because when governments are weak, that's where Al-Qaeda goes to train and to recruit. Yeah, it's coming now. I know I need the hook. Real quick.
You mentioned about the 6,000 positions, and you said you've got about 4,000 of those 6,000 filled. Usually when you're applying for something in cyber...
He's talking about jobs in cyber.
So usually when you're applying, they want some kind of security clearance. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a secret, whether it's top secret special SCI, top secret poly. Is there anything you can do to speed up the process for people who don't walk in the door with a top secret?
Security clearance are one of the most serious issues we have to deal with. I've been working on it for the 13 years I've been in the Intelligence Committee. We're working with some major companies now to try to start intern programs where when you come to work for them, you start your clearance process. And it's a good thing to start early, because if you might have done things in your life where you'll never pass a security clearance. So it's good to know that before you even get started to begin with. But what we're trying to do, because we have all of these jobs that are open, but sometimes when you graduate, whether it's a 2-year school or a 4-year school, it takes sometimes a year to get a clearance. So we all know it. I mean, all the major contractors and small are complaining. We have the jobs open, but we can't hire because of security clearance.
So it just seems like all the major contractors are stealing from Peter to pay Paul.
It's a major issue. I had a forum 3 weeks ago with the new head of economic development for the state of Maryland, Mike Gill, with all the NSA people, NSA and all the people from the major contractors to deal with that issue. And we're trying to work on it, but it's going to take a long period of time. We're over cleared too. We have way too many people that have clearances too. Who else had a hand up? Yeah, you.
You keep saying that like we're the strongest country. Where does the issue of the debt that we're in come into play?
Our debt. Well, we've been doing that for a long time. You know, where I came from is county executive, which is a good thing in the state of Maryland. You have to balance your budget every year. That's just not the way the federal government works. I would love to see it that way. But what you're doing, and it's an issue, I think when the Tea Party came into power, they raised a good issue. The issue is you have to deal with spending and debt. And spending, I mean, you can take any organization in the world. You can take your college here right now. You will find ways somewhere and somehow. Or you will just have to say, and I talked about sequestration in the beginning, which means cutting across the board, and how that's just a bad thing to do. So you have to pick priorities on what you're going to do. And you know, a lot of things occur too when the economy goes bad. We were in a terrible recession. We were almost in a depression, and we've now come out of that, and we're moving ahead. The biggest problem we have now is that the top 1%, we're at the highest discrepancy between the top 1% and middle America. And we need middle America to be paid more money, because once they do, then they'll start buying, and it'll really improve our economy and things that need to be done. So the committee I'm on, appropriations, we're always looking at the issue of cost and expending. But you know, our military budget, the reason we're the strongest country in the world is because of our technology. I'm on the board of the Naval Academy, and you know, the tremendous institution. people who graduate from the Naval Academy are as good, and West Point and Air Force are so good. But they're taught technology, they're taught cyber, they're taught things that other countries in the world just don't have from their military perspective. But that was a good question, because we've always got to keep our eye on the cost issue. Yeah.
This is just your personal opinion.
He's giving me the hook soon, so make it quick. Yeah.
Just your personal opinion, with the way the administration has been, with the AAA credit rating, debt being the highest that it's been, and
Wait, what was the beginning of your question?
your opinion towards the current administration, with the debt being the highest it's been, with the AAA credit score.
You're talking about the state of Maryland has AAA. We don't.
No. I'm talking about the nation's credit.
Yeah, okay, sure.
And then Ambassador Stevens, and then the way we're treating Benjamin Netanyahu. What is your opinion on these matters regarding the administration? And then, if viable, how would you go to rectify if you were to change it at all?
Well, first thing, you're evolved. You have a situation where Congress, which is controlled now by the Republicans, aren't working with the administration. I think the problem that the president had from the beginning is that he didn't have experience in managing, and that's okay. And then bring people who did. And I'm not knocking Harvard, but he brought a lot of the Harvard idealistic people. And in my personal experience in dealing within cyber legislation, they just wouldn't. They just listened to the other side sometimes more than where we were. And I'm an end game person. I manage Baltimore County. Like your president here, she's got to do budgets and has to deal with certain issues. Now, I think, and I want to raise one issue though, because you talked about Iran. Iran's very serious. We have got to be able to resolve that issue, because if in fact we don't cut a deal, that means war. There's no alternative, because Israel can't do it alone. So what bothered me about what happened, and I've met with Netanyahu on numerous occasions in Israel, so I'm right involved in all these things. I didn't like the fact that our president, whether it was Republican or Democrat, whether it was Bush or Obama, was dissed by Netanyahu and by Boehner. Okay, I thought that was wrong. You need to stay together as one when it comes to international politics. You can disagree with them. And then what happened, it would happen after that. The other thing that I had a problem with is that the president is the administration. His job is to negotiate treaties, and you have to stand as one. And when those senators, which a lot of them I think look back and say we should have sent that letter, and sent a letter to Iran and sandbagged your own president, that makes our country weaker. Where in the heck are we going? This is politics. These people weren't even involved. When you're negotiating, there's a lot going on, and you need to have leverage. I was involved in being briefed as a member of the Gang of Eight where these negotiations were. And we've come a long way, because what happens if we don't have an agreement, and if they try to make a nuclear weapon? The first thing, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, other countries, they're going to buy nuclear weapons probably from North Korea. It's going to make the world a lot more dangerous. So we have to try at all costs to negotiate. And the thing that's most important to me with respect to the Israeli issue is that I want to make sure that we have the transparency, we have the ability at any time to inspect. And if they violate, that we can jump right back on them again. And that's what you need. It's whether or not, you never trust Iran. Iran, they export terrorism, you can't trust them, but you've got to have the transparency issue that is there. And the politics is out of control when you're weakening your country's position on something to make yourself look good politically. Yes.
You're mentioning the decline of legitimacy when it comes
Of the what?
the decline of legitimacy when it comes to the United States, and I just wanted to.
What kind of legitimacy, though?
Well, the overall reputation of the country.
Okay.
And how efficient we are in getting the policy we need passed and everything. Do you think Hillary should be accepting donations from countries that have very bad human rights for women?
It depends on the facts. I mean, I know Bill Clinton, who has put a lot to the world, and that's what you want. You want your presidents and you want your leaders to go out and try to help the rest of the world, because there are a lot of people out there that need help. Now, that's all going to be determined in the political process, the checks and balances that we talked about. And if, in fact, she did something wrong, believe me, it'll be out there. You know, it's this thing on the emails. Most people in this country could care less about the emails one way or another. They want to know what she's going to do to get them jobs, what they're going to do to fix infrastructure. They want the basics. And by the way, the Democrats will do the same thing on the other side. And it's unfortunate that politics has gotten to the point where it's all about the negativity. What bothers me more than anything is the Koch brothers and people like that can buy elections without disclosing who they are. In my election, I'm more of a moderate pro-business Democrat. My district was held by Bobby Ehrlich, who was a Republican before I had it. Okay, now, I've had some of those people come against me. It didn't work, but, you know, and they don't have to disclose, terrible Supreme Court decision, in my opinion, that they don't have to disclose where the money's coming from. If they disclose, that would be enough for me, because I want my constituents to know that these people are paying for these millions of dollars, sometimes $15 million or so, for negative ads against somebody that a rich guy says they don't want. And what does that say to the one vote per individual? What does that say to people? Why vote? Because these people are buying these votes. I think that's inexcusable, outrageous, and I've been trying to, a couple of us have had bills in, and unfortunately the other side like the money, so, and we have some on our side to do it too, that put in, not as much, but, you know, I only raised the Koch brothers as an example because they're the ones that have been not outed, but people know they're putting a lot of money. Adelson's another one, guy who owns all the casinos. And who's on the Democratic? There's some on the Democratic side too, believe me. Yes.
Can you refinance a student loan?
You know, I think you can't yet, but we're trying to get that done. What we're trying to do is to refinance without the cost. And we're getting pushed back by the other side. And until we get that sequestration repealed, everything's cut across the board. You know, costs go up. Everything's cut across the board. And until that's repealed, our military will be weaker, our infrastructure will be weaker, and we won't be able to do things. Another major issue is Head Start. These are kids that in nursery school, they can go to, and statistics show they can be helped for the rest of their career if they get from poverty situations. But which is even better, what's better about Head Start is that it also, usually single mothers, are trained for a job, and it provides daycare in the school. And it's a program that works continually. And if you don't pay in the beginning, no matter what you say, then you're going to pay later on. Because if you don't take a kid out of a really bad situation, say in inner cities, where are they going to go if there's a temptation to 10 years old, get paid $100 for delivering drugs or that type of thing? Okay, is that it? Great. Glad we could be here and talk to you.